Hey Cokesbury Online, we are so glad that you have joined us wherever you're watching, whenever you're watching. We are glad that you are here. We are week 2 into our series called Into the Wild, and Stephen Defer is here with us, and he's going to be talking about how can we focus on the present? How can we focus on what God has given us each day instead of being so maybe worried about tomorrow or looking way into the future? Let's just be present and let's just focus on what God has given us today. Guess what? We are in person. We are live every Sunday morning, North and South campuses at 10 a.m. Make sure you go and download that Cokesbury app because that's where you register for your spot. So real quick, let's send it over to the band, and Kirk's gonna lead us in a song called Battle Belongs. Hey, I've said this before, and there's so many ways that you can take your next step here at Cokesbury, and one of them is through giving. And we have so many ways that you can give to Cokesbury. You can give on our app, you can mail it in, you can give at cokesbury.tv, or you can do it so easy and text to give to the number at the bottom of the screen. And once again, we are so thankful that you guys have continued to give. We're truly blessed with the people that call Cokesbury our home. Let's shoot it back over to the band one more time. This is a song called Waymaker.
You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you, and I worship you. You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you, I worship you. You are Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, turning lives around, and I worship you, I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you, oh God, I worship you, yeah. You are Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Yes, you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Come on, sing it again. Sing you are, you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. That is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Sing, that is who you are. That is who you are. That is who you are. Come on, that is who you are. And all your glory, God. And all your majesty, that is who you are. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's who you are. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop. Oh, you never stop, you never stop, you never stop, yeah. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, and you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. That is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Miracle, yes you are God. Yes you are God. That is who you are. 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 That is who you are.
Hey everybody, welcome. My name is Stephen. I'm the senior pastor here at Cokesbury Church. I'm really glad that you guys have taken time out of your schedule to be here. I want to say hey to our Johnson City campus. Those guys are watching us online as well, and so I'm glad to see you guys. I hope everybody had a chance to do something fun this weekend. We're in this series that we're calling Into the Wild, and we started it last week, and we're learning how do you navigate through the wilderness of life, and we're using the Israelite people as kind of our model for how God formed them and shaped them. Kind of the key verse from last week comes from Exodus chapter 13, verse 17. It says this: when Pharaoh finally let the people go, God did not lead them along the main road that runs through the Philistine territory, even though that was the shortest route. So God led them in a roundabout way through the wilderness toward the Red Sea, and thus the Israelites left Egypt like an army ready for battle. And what we learned last week is it's just something that we've all got to get comfortable with, and we all have to learn to embrace to some extent in our life. And that is that every single human being is facing wilderness moments. And what we learned from the text last week was that God often leads us into the wilderness, and that creates a natural tension, right? We just saw in the text that there was a direct route to get from rescue to reward, but God chose to take them in the roundabout way. And I've not met anybody that likes their life going that way. We typically want the easiest, most friction-free path. And yet God uses the roundabout way to teach us and grow us into who we need to be as we prepare to face the future. And so what we have to learn is that the wilderness moments of life is not punishment, it's just simply God preparing us for what's coming down the pike. The wilderness may feel like a setback, but it's often a setup for you and I learning to experience God in a much deeper way. And so our job is not to turn back, and it's not to wish for what was. It's to trust that God has a plan and a purpose for our life. God takes us the roundabout way because he needs to shape us and form in us things that we will need as we approach the promised land. And so today we're going to learn that in the wilderness moments of life, it is possible for you and I to feel a certain amount of scarcity. If you think about it, in moments just like you and I are facing right now, there can be moments where we feel like something's lacking or there's something missing, or maybe we don't quite have the right stuff to even survive, much less actually thrive in this current season in our life. And I don't know what that looks like for you, but I'd be willing to bet that you've got your list. That maybe there are moments where you feel like, you know what, I don't have enough strength, or I don't have enough wisdom, or maybe I'm running out of resources, or the energy I had 4 months ago, that energy's gone, or maybe because of the way life has been thrown into chaos, there just doesn't ever seem like there's enough time. That's what time in the wilderness entails. But here's the deal. It does not mean that God has abandoned you. It does not mean that God is punishing you. It does not mean that for whatever reason God is setting you back. It could be that God is actually setting you up for his blessing. God didn't bring you into the wilderness to leave you in the wilderness. It's exactly what we said last week. If God led you to it, God will ultimately lead you through it. And our job is to hold on to faith and keep putting one foot in front of the other. And so today I want to pick up the story a couple of chapters later in Exodus chapter 16, verse 3. Let me kind of set it up to refresh your memory, right? Like, I know a ton of stuff has happened this week and it's easy to forget, right? One day right now feels like 2 weeks. But here's what's going on. God rescues the Israelites from captivity in Egypt, and he leads them out into the wilderness, and they're now heading toward the promised land. And at first glance, this may not mean much, and it may not have much of an impact on us. But it would have been a huge deal for Israel, because every single one of them would have been raised on a very distinct promise. God spoke to their ancestor Abraham and told them that he would use them to form a new nation, that he would bless them so that they could in turn be a blessing to the entire human race. And so from the very beginning, the Israelite people were formed and shaped for a greater purpose in life. And so for generation after generation after generation, the people would have clung to, and they would have hoped for, and they would have dreamed about the day that that promise would have been fulfilled. And now it's that moment. They're heading toward the promised land in Israel. As you might imagine, Pharaoh, even though he agreed to let them go, wasn't really fired up about that. And so he sends his army to chase after them. And the people thought that they were trapped. They had the Red Sea on one side. They had Pharaoh's army breathing down their necks on the other side. And they honestly thought that in this moment, we're finished. Like, this is it for us. You can just throw in the towel. You can ring the final bell. Fourth quarter's come to an end. This thing is over. And then there was this iconic scene where Moses raises his arms, right? If you've ever seen Prince of Egypt, right? Remember that cartoon? It's sort of this dramatic scene. The sea parts, the people of Israel walk across the ocean on dry land, and as soon as that last Israelite crosses, Moses drops his arms, the sea comes crashing down, and Pharaoh's army is defeated, and they're finally set free once and for all. All of that happened in Exodus chapter 14. But by the end of the very next chapter, chapter 15, literally right after they had witnessed this amazing and miraculous and honestly supernatural movement of God, they start to complain because they don't have enough water. It's amazing. So God leads them to this area where there's like this river, and they're able to get the water they need. And then we get to chapter 16, and there's even more complaining. Check it out. Now, remember, they've just witnessed the parting of the Red Sea and the defeat of their arch enemy. Here we go, verse 1. Then the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin between Elim and Mount Sinai. They arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. But now you brought us into the wilderness, listen to this, to starve us all to death. Did you notice how long they've been gone from Egypt? 1 month. The Israelites had only been in the wilderness 1 month. We're 8 months in, y'all. Here's what we learned about the wilderness. If we're not careful, the wilderness can cause us to lose perspective. They're just 4 weeks in and they're like, man, God, you just brought us out here to kill us. And they thought, if we could just go back to Egypt, like that would be awesome. That would be absolutely amazing. Going back felt better than facing an uncertain future. See, Israel forgot how bad it was in Egypt. Like they were slaves. They lived for decades in utter poverty. They faced miserable circumstances. They had been crying out to God. In Exodus chapter 1 and chapter 2, they were breaking under the whips of the Egyptians. They were moaning about having to make even more bricks with less straw, and so they were overworked and they were taxed absolutely to their limit. And now they're forgetting all that they had gone through. They're forgetting they had no freedom whatsoever. They had no ability to move about and worship the way they wanted to. They were forgetting that just 80 years earlier, Pharaoh had issued a decree that said all Israelites were required to kill their baby boys. Think about that. When a baby boy was born, they were to drown him in the Nile River because the Pharaoh didn't want those boys to grow up to be men because he knew if they became men, they might soon outnumber the Egyptians and be able to overthrow the entire empire. This is where the Israelites, after just 1 month in the wilderness, this is where they are. They're like, man, it was great back there in Egypt. They could not see what was waiting for them out there in the future. And likewise, when you and I lose perspective, we often miss what God's trying to do in our life. The wilderness can create a false fondness about the past. So here's what I want you to see. When we find ourselves in the wilderness, we've got to take it just one day at a time. You can't over-romanticize the past, nor can you become paralyzed by fear of the future. We have to trust that wherever we find ourselves today, on this day, that's where God has allowed us to be in this season. We just have to follow faithfully. And you know this. We can get ourselves into a deal where we have so much fear about the future that we get this distorted idea about the past. And to be honest with you, Netflix doesn't help much, right? Like you'll binge something and you'll see people high-fiving and you'll see people packed into restaurants or they'll be hugging each other and we think, well, that's cool. Now if somebody rolls up on you and they're like, hey, give me a high five, you're like, whoa, dude, don't infect me, bro. We remember back then, and it's so easy to want to go back. It's also easy to look ahead and not know what's coming at you around the corner. And you can let fear literally paralyze you. When you find yourself in a situation where it feels like your resources are drying up and you're worried about tomorrow, the tendency is to allow that fear to grow and to begin to panic. This is where the Israelites are. They're like, God, you brought us all the way out here to starve us. You're just going to kill us off. Is that why you brought us all the way out here? Because you didn't want to make a big scene about it? I mean, they've lost their perspective at this point, right? They've allowed their panic and their anxiety to take total control of their lives. And so here's what God says to them in verse 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, look, I'm going to rain down food from heaven for you. Each day, the people can go out and pick up as much food as they need for that day. I will test them in this to see whether or not they will follow my instructions. Now, here's what I see in this text. You and I have got to seek God daily. Sounds simple, right? Seek God daily. The Israelites, the next day, they woke up and they go outside their tents and they see all of this kind of white, flaky stuff all over the ground. It was manna, right? And so they picked it up and they ate it, and it tastes really good. It was exactly what they needed. God had given them exactly what they needed most. And so on the first day, they go out and this stuff tastes good. It's sweet. It's satisfying. And they're like, you know what, man, I'm going to store some of this stuff up. Like, I'm going to put some on the shelf. I might even build a storage unit. We're going to get enough of this to last days and days and days. Maybe they even send their kids out and they tell them, look, you guys go out and you gather up as much of this stuff as you possibly can. Maybe some of the more crafty Israelites thought, you know what? This is pretty good. I think I can make some money off this stuff. Maybe I can tap into some entrepreneurial stuff right here. But there's just one problem. The text tells us it went bad every single day. That meant you couldn't store it up. That meant you could not preserve it and you could not ration it out. It went bad at the end of every single day. See, God was trying to teach his people something that's very, very specific. That in the wilderness, and really if you think about it every single day, but especially in the wilderness, God's promise of provision is for today. And I don't know about you, but I don't like that. I like to live my life with just a little bit more certainty than that. I want to control and I want to guide and I want to plan and I want to strategize how my life should actually go. And yet God wants to teach us in the wilderness that when you and I can't rely on our money, and when we can't rely on the certainty of our job, when we cannot rely on the strength of our country, when we cannot rely solely on the size of our 401k or our certainty about the future, it's in those moments that God's trying to teach us that you and I must rely only on him. He's the one we can trust. And the promise of provision is just one day at a time. And the idea is that when you lean into this wilderness moment with a one day at a time approach, it is by divine design that you and I experience something very specific. We find peace. Lamentation says that the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. In other words, God gives us exactly what we need on a daily basis, but we got to take control of them every single morning. We got to be looking for them. They've got to be on our radar. God's mercies are freely available to every human being. They're there every morning when you wake up. Jesus pointed to this when he told us how to pray. He said, this then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. See, it's just getting to a position where we're like, God, just give us what we need today. I can't do anything about yesterday. I've got little or no influence about what's going to happen tomorrow. So this day, I'm going to place my focus right here on just this 24-hour period of time. This day, give me what I need. Now, you can do that, can't you? I mean, think about it. Every day, you can ask God for what you need. We should do this every day, but especially when we find ourselves out in the wild, we should start each day with a simple prayer. Maybe for you, it's just, God, give me the food that I need for today. Or God, give me the joy that I need for today. God, give me the patience that I know I'm going to need for today. God, I'm going to face some stuff that I may not have the answers for. So God, today, will you give me the wisdom that I need? God, I'm going to be interacting with other human beings, so would you give me the words that I need? God, would you give me the talent that I need? Give me the solutions that I need. God, would you give me the love that I'm going to need just to get through this day? God, will you give me the human connection that I need? Will you give me the opportunity that I need for today? God, will you give me the endurance that I need today? God, will you give me your presence because I need it today and all day and every single day? See, y'all, I'm telling you, God has an endless supply of everything you need, and he will generously supply every bit of it. It may not come exactly the way that you want it to. It may wind up coming in a roundabout way. Sometimes he may even give you more than you need, but he always gives you exactly what you need. So I know that a lot of us may be wanting what we had yesterday. And I know that we've got like straight up legit concerns about tomorrow. But I showed up today to remind you that the promise, it's for today. So seek God daily. God really can use your setback as a set up for his blessings. Here's another thought for you. Gather God's provision. The Israelites remind us that God provided for each day in the wilderness, but we've still got to go out and gather. Look at this. Exodus chapter 16, verse 17. So the people of Israel did as they were told. Some gathered a lot, some only a little. But when they measured it out, everyone had just enough. Those who gathered a lot had nothing left over, and those who gathered only a little had enough. Each family had just what it needed. Now, I bet somebody needs to hear this. I bet right now you're scared. And I bet more than one of us is afraid. There's a bunch of us that don't know what's coming in the future, and we're not sure how we're going to handle the situation that we find ourselves in. Listen, I believe God will be faithful to you just like he was faithful to the Israelites. God will provide for you just what you need. And he may surprise you because in the wilderness, you often find yourself in this maze where God does miracles, right? I mean, there's a bunch of us. We know there were moments when we were weak and God gave us strength and we don't know where that strength came from. There were moments maybe where we were completely freaking out and yet for whatever reason, the sense of peace just washed over our souls. There are moments when we were scared about something and God gave you confidence. See, God always shows up and provides for us in ways that we've never experienced it. God provided manna, but the people of Israel had to go out and get it. In other words, they got to participate. They had a role to play. God was inviting them into the process of freedom. He laid his daily blessings out there, but they had to go out and claim it. We talk about this all the time. You don't stumble into growth by accident. You can't sit around hoping or dreaming or longing for things to be different and just assume that it will miraculously happen by some sort of cosmic osmosis. It's not the way it works. You and I've got a role to play. If you need grace in your life, offer grace to somebody else. If you long for forgiveness in your life, spend your time extending forgiveness to somebody else. If you need a little dose of hope, go be hope for somebody else. If you want to know God more, read his word, pray, get connected with a small group, find a way to serve somebody. If you need a little bit more love in your life, practice loving other people. You got to go out and gather God's provision. And then here's my final thought. Rejoice in the Lord always. That's a good one. Rejoice in the Lord always. Exodus 16:31 says that the Israelites called the food manna. It was white like coriander seed, and it tasted like honey wafers. So this wasn't some average type of food, y'all. This was like getting to eat a Snickers first thing every single morning. And what the text is telling us is that God doesn't give us his leftovers. God gives us the very best he has to offer. Even in the wilderness, God is moving and working. But you and I have got to train ourselves to look for it and then find ways to be a part of it. We've got to approach life like we're never going to waste a crisis. We've got to use every moment that we get to gain clarity about what actually matters most. Listen, so much of what happens to you and I in life, we cannot control. And if we're honest about it, most of us, even though we don't like that, we would admit we don't know what's coming at us on most days. And so when a crisis approaches, when we find ourselves wandering around in the wilderness, we can't just sit around and lament and complain and whine about it. We've got to use that crisis. We've got to look more intently for God. We've got to keep searching for the solutions that we need. And we've got to figure out, how can I gain clarity in this moment about what actually matters most? One of my favorite passages in the Bible comes from this sort of obscure little prophet. It's a book in in the Old Testament. It's a guy named Habakkuk. And Habakkuk was a prophet that God raised up to speak to the people of Israel, the same group that's wandering in the wilderness, when they faced a different kind of wilderness experience. And in Habakkuk chapter 3, here's what he says. Even though the fig trees have no blossoms, and there are no grapes on the vines, even though the olive crop fails and the fields lie empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the fields and the cattle barns are empty. So you kind of get what's going on here, right? Like things are not going the way they thought they would go. He says, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I'll be joyful in the God of my salvation. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes me as sure-footed as a deer, able to tread upon the heights. I like that. Here's what the prophet's saying. I won't just worship God when everything's going well in my life. I won't just worship God when everything's cool, calm, and collected. I'm not just going to be a person who shows faith when God is pouring out blessing after blessing in my life. What he's saying is, no, that's not me. I'm going to worship him when it seems like everything is going wrong. I'm going to worship him when money seems to be draining out of my bank account. I'm going to worship him when I'm not sure what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm going to worship when I'm filled with unknowns and fears, when my back feels like it's against the wall, because I know that I worship a God. Even though all those things may be true, I know he is my salvation and he is my provider. So you and I've got to make that deal. That's our next step. That's our challenge. We need to learn to rejoice in God every single day. See, here's what I'm trying to say. There's power in rejoicing in the even though. Think about that. Even though my checking account is going down, I'll rejoice in a God who provides. Even though I'm facing issues too big for me to figure out, I'll rejoice in a God of wisdom. I'm scared of what the future may hold, but I'll rejoice in a God who's got the whole world in the palm of his hand. Even though people around me are panicking, I'll rejoice in the God of peace. Even though the virus may get out of control, and I really, really do fear for the people that I love, I'll rejoice in the God who can heal and protect. I get discouraged by all the stuff that gets canceled or rescheduled, but I'm going to rejoice in the God who is the same yesterday and today and forever. I'm freaked out by what I see on the news, but I'll rejoice in the God who is Lord of Lords and who is ruler of all the nations. I feel like I can barely hold things together, but I will learn to rejoice in the God who holds me together. I can't see a way out of this wilderness that I'm in right now, but I'll rejoice in the God who is ultimately leading me to the promised land. Listen, y'all, time in the wilderness, it will either make you or break you. And a sign of spiritual maturity, a sign that we're walking a little closer to Jesus right now than maybe we were this time last year. A sign of spiritual maturity is learning to rejoice even when you and I see little reason to rejoice. Listen, the wilderness is hard. Nobody ever said it was going to be easy. So much of finding yourself in those wilderness moments of life, it's the unknown that drives us crazy. And yet what I think God is trying to teach the Israelites and what I think he's trying to teach us is that if we will seek him daily, if we'll look for those opportunities to go out and gather his provisions, and if we'll find a way, even when we don't feel like it, to rejoice and give God thanks, that maybe that's the way that we find the strength that we need to keep putting one foot in front of the other. Maybe that's how we navigate our way, the roundabout way through the wilderness. Maybe that's how you and I continue to take a step forward toward the promised land. See, the wilderness, it does not last forever. Eventually, we're going to get to the fulfillment of God's promise. And our challenge between that moment and the moment that you and I find ourselves in right now, it's exactly what we said last week. Do I have the strength? And do I have the determination? Do I have the fortitude deep down in my soul to keep walking in faith? to keep trusting that because God is a good God, He has not brought me this far to leave me here. If God brought me to it, He will see me through it. This week, I'm praying for peace in your life. I'm praying that God will open up opportunities. I'm praying that you can get some rest. I'm praying that you'll find a new sense of hope. And I'm praying that you'll allow God to use you to impact somebody else's life. Y'all listen, if we can do that over the next 7 days, there's no telling what God can do to bring about change. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. See you guys next week.
There's a space in every beating heart, and there's a longing that reaches past the stars, and there's an answer to every question mark, and there's a name, and there's a hope flowing through these veins. There's a voice that echoes through the pain, and there's an ember ready for the flame. There's a name. We will fix our eyes on the one who overcame. We will stand triumphs over fear, and there's a laughter that wipes away all tears. There's a presence that changes atmospheres. There's a name. We will fix our eyes. We will fix our eyes on the one who overcame. Stand in awe of the one who breaks the chain. Love has a name. Love has a name. Jesus. Love has a name. Love has a name. Jesus. Stand in awe of the one who breaks the chains. We sing love has a name. Come on. Love has a name. Love has a name. Jesus.